Hello, testing. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming along. I was about to say, can everyone find themselves a seat? Because that's what I got written down, but you've all already done that, so top marks, guys. Apart from a couple over there. Unbelievable, guys.
Hi there, my name is Ruben. I'm a second-year classics student.
And my name's Kate, and I'm a second-year English and German student.
And this week we are looking at the theme of hope, which I'm having to read this because I haven't learnt it. A week of exploring stories of changed lives and the questions we ask to make sense of life. And that is because we are the Christian Union, and we are on campus in order to give every student on campus the opportunity to hear about the good news of Jesus Christ. And this afternoon's talk is on the theme of hope in loneliness, and what does it mean to truly belong?
Yep, and just a quick reminder of what we're going to do this evening. So you guys have already started your lanterns. We're then going to have a talk. We're then going to have time for Q&A, and then continue with the lanterns, and there's going to be Chinese snacks and more snacks through in the tent, the big white tent that you may or may not have seen outside. So that is the plan.
Cool. In the unlikely event of a fire, there are doors there, maybe over there if you're desperate. So just find your way out.
Yep, and one small request, please could you make sure that your phones are all on silent / turned off, whatever works for you, just to make sure that, it's not disturbing for Peter or during the Q&A.
And with that, I would like to invite our speaker, Peter, up to the front. If we can have a round of applause, yeah?
I'm just grabbing your standy thing. There you go.
Hi. Thank you.
Cheers. Would you like to introduce yourself, Peter?
So I'm Peter Teagle. I work for an organisation called Friends International, and we work with international students. And so my job, I have a kind of roving brief as head of event speaking, which means I get to do the fun stuff like talks like this up and down the country, explaining the message of Jesus and the Bible to people from a range of different cultures. I train for Christian ministry in Singapore. My wife is from Singapore, although we met here. And that is what I enjoy doing. Got 3 kids, which are not kids anymore, they're in their 20s.
Brilliant, thanks. I didn't actually know that, so that was great. And in typical CU fashion, I'm going to ask you a bit of a different question. So, Peter, if you could invent a new flavour of ice cream, what would it be?
Right, okay. So, put your hand up if, like me, you don't go in for chocolate ice cream. Chocolate is not your thing. Well, so I'm really not a chocolate ice cream fan, except in Oxford when we lived there, had chocolate and chili, which has literally got chili in it. It hits the back of your throat. It's the only kind of chocolate ice cream I've liked. But my favourite ice cream is salted caramel. So I would like to try salted caramel with chili.
Interesting.
Yeah. Interesting.
We're just going to hand over to you. Take it away whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I do have a book which we bought some copies of. So the last ones are over there, and it's called Is Christianity a Western Religion? It is free, and it is basically a write-up of my answers to the 20 most commonly asked questions that international students ask. Is Christianity a Western religion? And other questions that international students ask. You don't need to be an international student to, of course, read it, but it is written mainly to answer things from a slightly non-Western perspective. So on your seats or somewhere near you, you should probably have a piece of paper like this. And if not, and you can find somebody to help you find it in the Bible, that's great. But this is just a little bit of a part of the Bible, a part of the life of Jesus from Luke's Gospel. And I'm just going to read it out to begin with, so that we're all on the same page. It says Jesus heals a man with leprosy. While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. Then Jesus ordered him, "Don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sickness. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Sure, you know what I mean by leprosy. Is it called Hansen's disease, is it? Where it's an infection which affects the nerve endings, and often people kind of find that they can't feel, so they damage their extremities, and then they get infections and so forth, and it can really severely disfigure the face, and they lose fingers and so forth. The term is a bit broad in the original Greek, so it may not just be that particular disease, but that is what is going on. Why am I talking about leprosy? Well, some years ago, I was taking my then very small daughter to nursery school, and there was a couple from China who were bringing their grandson to the same nursery school, and I speak just a little Mandarin. Just enough to impress people, but not much more. Because they didn't speak any English, we got talking, and they were very excited to find an Englishman that at least could pronounce some words correctly. And they asked me, did I have a Chinese name? We used to live in China, and I had a name which was given to me, which makes more sense than my English one does. And I said, yes, my name is Gao Zhetong. And they were so happy. Because Gao is, well, it's a very common Chinese surname, and it just means tall. And my wife gave it to me because, well, hey, I'm tall. But their family name was also Gao. They said, we are one of us, you belong to us. Like we were family or something. Actually, it's just a made-up name for me. But they were really happy because here they were in Oxford, not being able to speak the language, and they met somebody with the same surname as them. You see, when we're away from home, we feel it. We all want to belong. And just for a second, just for a minute or two, turn to the people near to you and ask each other, where do you really call home? Okay? Where do you really call home? Okay. So I wonder whether that the answer to that question is a little bit complicated. Some people find it easy to say, oh, well, home is such and such a place. And for some of us, it keeps shifting. Basically, for us, home is always where we're not at that particular moment. But home now for my wife and I and my family is Bath, but we've only lived there for 2 years. My daughter, when people ask her, where are you from, where are you really from, she always says, well, actually, she had this situation. So my children are obviously half Chinese, and Laura was at a camp, and one of her friends said to her, actually, Laura, where are you from? She said, well, I'm from Oxford. And he said, well, no, but where are you really from? And she said, well, my mum's from Singapore. And he said, I knew it. I knew you were Korean. What? So anyway, but where we belong is a complex question. And everybody wants to belong. And it's not necessarily an easy thing. People will do anything to belong somewhere. Everything that we do, from the energy we put into our studies, the way we speak, the music we listen to, the way we dress, the way we do our hair, is at least in some part done to be accepted and to belong by our community, by our friends, by our family, by our work colleagues, and as society as a whole. And one of the greatest pleasures in life is to belong, to know that you belong. But then one of the most painful experiences in life is to find out that you don't belong. One of our daughter's friends, her parents split up, and she lived with her mum. And one day she came home from school. She was maybe about 14, 15, and she came home to find the doors locked, locks changed, and all her belongings in bags outside the house. Her mother had just decided that she just didn't want to be a mother anymore. And in fact, some years later, she held a funeral for her daughter. Kind of what damage does that do to a person for her own mother to say, you are dead to me. I don't want to be your mother anymore. But it's often not as severe as that. But even so, all too often, we live in a world that says, you're not good enough. You're not cool enough. You're not slim enough. You're not rich or successful enough. You did something we hate you for. We simply don't like you. What do you do when you're in that position? Now, the story that we read just now is about a man who doesn't belong. We actually don't know anything about him apart from the fact that he has this disease. But we do know that because of what happened in those days to people who had this disease, he did not belong. Maybe he once did. Maybe he had a family. Maybe he had children. Maybe he was rich or poor. We just don't know. But when he contracted this disease and it became apparent to people that he had this, he was immediately cast out. Now, I actually have two friends, I've had two friends who have had leprosy, British people who have lived and worked with leprosy patients, and they've caught the disease themselves. But these days you can get treatment for it. In those days, the only thing you could do was to exclude the person from the society. And although it's not very, you can't catch it so easily. Nevertheless, to kind of quarantine the person, they had to cast them out of the society just to live with people who had the same disease. And that was a slow, terrible, humiliating, painful death sentence. One moment he belongs, the next moment he's driven out to live on his own or with other people with the same disease, no longer able to kiss his wife, hug his children, go to work, or celebrate with his friends. The worse than that, he had to warn people that he was unclean. Keep away, I'm unclean. Imagine having to do that. Nobody would ever touch him again. They say about elderly people in old people's homes that one thing they really miss is being touched. Tactile, connecting with people is so important. And then there was the hatred and the shame. Diseases like that frightened people. They didn't like to think it could happen to them, so they maybe thought, well, maybe he's being punished. And maybe God is punishing him for something that he did wrong. A woman that we know from Taiwan became a Christian because she had a disabled son. And her mother blamed her for having a disabled son, saying, you must have done something wrong in a previous life. You see, when things like that happen, it's easy to blame someone you don't like to think it can happen to you. But the man in our story had no one except a tiny hope in a man called Jesus. Jesus was already becoming very famous for his miracles of healing, his ability to heal people. So much so that Jesus was having a very hard time actually kind of even getting into places. It was just very, very crowded. Everyone was wanting a bit of his attention, and it was difficult for him to get to the people who really needed his attention the most. But we read in the story right at the beginning that this man finds Jesus, falls on his face, and goes, it says, if you are willing, you can make me clean. But notice the words, not you can heal me, but you can make me clean. It's a specific way of addressing his disease as being unclean. Now, it's always been very interesting to me to get to know different cultures and how we understand what it means to be clean. I used to have a big issue when we were doing weekends away for students from East Asia staying with English families, and all the students wanted to shower at night before going to bed, and all the host families expected them to shower in the morning. And we kind of had this bit of a thing, and we had to explain to people, if you're from a hot country, you don't want to get into a nice clean bed with the sweat and the dirt of the day. Whereas in this country, you don't want to, you sweat most in bed, and therefore you want to enter the day fresh. I won't ask you which one you do, or maybe both. Once when we were in Athens, when our kids were small, and we went past a shop, and an old man came out of the shop and made a big fuss of our daughter. He kind of pinched her cheeks and ruffled her hair and said, well, I don't know what he said because it was all in Greek, but I assume he was saying, oh, what a cute little girl, and so forth. And then he went and spat on her head. What do you do as a parent when somebody is obviously paying some positive attention to your child, saying what a cute thing, and then spits on her head? Now, some of you may know what I'm talking about. But because we didn't know, we sort of went, thank you, I'll just go and wash her hair. But we sensed that there was something cultural here. And we read later that actually in a large part of the world, particularly Eastern Mediterranean, off into Central Asia, there is a superstition around the evil eye. You heard of the evil eye? Where basically, if you say something nice about someone, then you risk a kind of curse coming upon them, and so you make them seem a little bit less in the spirit's eyes by spitting lightly on them. And so in this man's mind, he was being kind and responsible because he was protecting my daughter from evil spirits. In my worldview, I was not thinking about evil spirits, I was thinking about bacteria. And that was not kind or responsible. But in some cultures, some kind of food is considered unclean. My brother-in-law on a flight to Australia played a joke on me and ordered me kosher food. It took ages to get there, and it was all covered in wrappings, and I couldn't get at it. And when I was growing up, my parents lived in a place where someone's house and garden had to be kept nice and clean and tidy, because the people in the area who didn't have tidy gardens, they were not so nice people. We judge people according to our version of what it means to be clean. Because to most cultures, being clean is a morality thing. It's to do with morals, not bacteria. But there are also times when you and I do things which make us feel unclean. There are times when we do things, or we watch things, or we talk about things, or we allow something to come into our life which makes us feel dirty inside. What do you do about that? You see, this disease didn't just affect the man's skin, it affected his whole life. Keep away from us. You are diseased, you are dirty, cursed, unclean, deserving of all that happened to you. But he comes to Jesus and says, Jesus, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus reached out and touched him. Now, if Reuben, where's Reuben? There. So if Reuben's been off playing football in the mud, and I've just had a shower and changed my clothes, and Reuben comes to me and says, Peter, I haven't seen you in a long time, and throws his arms around me in a big man hug. Reuben doesn't become clean because I've had a shower. It's clear that I become muddy because he's been playing football in the rain. Now, you can't catch leprosy quite so easily just by touching someone, but that wasn't seen as that in those days. It was seen as a kind of moral corruption. And what amazed people from the story is that Jesus did not become ceremonially dirty by touching the man. It was that the man became clean because Jesus touched him. We call this powerful purity, holiness. And Jesus was powerful in his purity. Now, we had a freezer in our garage, which is just next door to the house. Kind of chest freezer, the lid like this. And one hot summer, one of the kids put their bicycle away and bumped the plug and switched it off. And we didn't notice for 2 weeks. Until one day, I kind of went into the garage and I immediately sensed that something was wrong. And I looked over at the freezer, and there he was, this just white box, looks normal. And I saw the plug, and my heart sank. So I went over to it, and I lifted up the lid, and I wonder if you can imagine, it was just full of this liquid, rotting mess of wilting vegetables, of rotting meat, and a soup that used to be ice cream. So what do you think I did? Well, I did what any man would do in my position. I thought, I have no idea what to do about that. I have no time right now. So I shut the lid, switched the freezer back on, walked away, and left it for a very long time. You see, we are just like that. On the outside, as long as everything looks okay, then it's all right. We work hard, we try to be good, we avoid breaking laws and hurting people. We try to make sure that the outward me looks all right. And we don't look too closely inside, because if I do, what happens if I find a big mess there? In fact, I know there's a big mess there, and I have no idea what to do about it. So the best thing to do is to keep the lid shut and walk away. And the real reason why people feel loneliness is not because there are not physical bodies around us that we can talk to, but because inside we feel this shame, this deep, deep shame, and we don't know why we feel it. We tell ourselves we ought not to feel it, but we do. But Jesus says, I am willing, be clean. In the story, you notice that Jesus tells him not to tell anyone. That's because, actually, for two reasons. One is that it was getting difficult for Jesus to get in to talk to the people that he needed to. He was getting a little bit over-popular at that point. But the other reason was that this man had a particular thing he needed to do before he would be accepted back into society. He couldn't just say, Jesus is maybe clean, and they go, oh, okay, we'll take his word for it. He needed to go and get the proper certification from the priest. And this included making a sacrifice, sacrificing an animal. The sacrifice of the animal did not make him clean. Jesus had already made him clean. But in many cultures and in many religions around the world, there's a common idea of the idea of sacrifice, isn't there? That people do all sorts of things. They may sacrifice money or an animal or some kind of food offering or paper money. And often it's done with the intention or the hope of getting the attention of the god or gods that people worship to be acceptable to that deity. But the Bible makes it really clear that there is only one sacrifice that can ever truly make us clean. There's only one sacrifice that can go into the freezer and deal with the mess that is inside. And that's not a sacrifice that you and I can make. It was a sacrifice that was made for us. And it's the sacrifice of Jesus himself through his death on a cross. You see, when Jesus died and then rose again from the dead, what he was doing was he's offering you and me the chance to come so that he can touch us and make us clean in a way that you would not imagine. You see, to most people, God is far away. He's distant, mysterious. And we feel excluded from him, and so much of human religion is the attempt to try to get back to him, to try and make some connection with the divine, but he still seems like a stranger. But Jesus came so that that barrier which is really all the stuff which is inside us, which drives us away from God, he came to take it away. Now, we're a kind of, put your hands up if you're a shoes off at the door household in your family. Right, okay. I didn't particularly grow up with it, but we are a shoes off at the door household now. My wife, as I say, is from Singapore. But when I go to visit my Korean friends, that's a whole new level. They express it to us that they really don't like it when people come into their house with the outdoor shoes on. And that's just part of culture. It's way, if you come into their house with outdoor shoes on, it's like saying, well, your house isn't really that clean. It's okay. Every time we go to visit them, we must take our shoes off at the door. There's no point me saying, well, actually my shoes, you see, they've still got the price label on them. They're brand new. That's no good. I can't point to my wife's shoes and say, well, her shoes are dirtier than mine, so I can come in with my shoes on, but she has to take them off, and that won't do either. I must take my shoes off, but they always provide slippers for us to wear. They're never big enough for me, but that's another matter. You see, once I have accepted the fact that my shoes will never be clean enough to come into their house, and when I've accepted the offer of slippers so that I can come in, I am then free to enjoy a meal with them, time with them, relationship with them. And the reality is it's the same with God. See, God has that powerful purity, that holiness that I talked about earlier. And God reaches out and wants us to be in his family permanently. But there's something that we must do first, and that is to recognize that no matter how good we think we are, we will never be pure and clean enough. And so we need to recognize that, but also to recognize that Jesus is the one who lived the perfect life and died and rose again. In so doing, he offers us his life. And so by stepping out of our shoes, which is kind of like no longer relying on my own sense of goodness, not being self-righteous, but instead accepting that Jesus lived the perfect life for me and died as my sacrifice, then I can come in and enjoy a relationship with God as my Father forever. So this afternoon, I'm not really talking about kind of the intellectual reasons for God. Covered that in other talks. Really, my question to you is, deep down, do you know God as a stranger or as a father? And please know that it doesn't depend on how good you think you are. It only depends on your response to Jesus. Are you willing to come in? Where are you standing right now? At the door wanting to come in? Or are you ready to come inside? Thank you.
Am I on? Yes. So we are going to have a very quick Q&A session just now. Do we have a Slido? Insert Slido here. Might want to do that. And just bear with us while we set up. Cool. So everyone, get out your phone and scan the QR code. You don't have to put a question in, but you can upvote other questions that are put in. We'll just set up some chairs now, and then we'll get cracking. Thank you.
Cool beans. I'm just going to grab the chairs. Should we... Oh. Do I need to move forward? I don't know. Anyways, we'll get started on the first question then. How does being clean help me feel less lonely?
Thank you. That's a really good question. I think this talk was really designed for different cultures. So to address a range of cultures in the room, and some cultures will see the connection between being clean and being lonely quite easily. Others less so. And maybe in the West we're not quite so used to that kind of correlation. But I think when you feel maybe clean is a kind of particular cultural word, but maybe if I feel ashamed, shame, I think we understand what it means to feel shame. And even though, I think what happens is that we then tend to pretend a lot more. We can't really be open with people, and so that makes us feel cut off. And I would guess that in a room of this size, there's going to be some people who perhaps feel that they've got plenty of friends around them, plenty of people around them, but there's just something which stops them really being themselves, kind of being open, being truthful about themselves. And I think that's what the barrier is.
Thank you. Our next question is, if I'm waiting and ready to walk through the door to get to know Jesus, what do I do?
Well, there are various books on that table that will probably give you, maybe at the back of it, or a kind of little prayer to pray, and those things are helpful, including in my own book. But really, you don't need a special way. It is a case of just trusting, of coming to God. You know, for me, I went for a walk in a field. And then as I was walking, I just told God the truth about the real me inside. And then I said, I accept that Jesus died for me. I give my life to you. And then I turned around and went home. But I can mark back the huge change in my life back to that walk. So however you do it, it's very simple. Tell God the truth, trust in Jesus, and accept it.
Thank you so much. Just as a side point on that, if you don't feel like you're quite at that stage, but you'd really like to learn a little bit more about how to maybe get to that stage, or whether you'd like to get to that stage or not, I'd really recommend picking up an Uncover from the book table back there, as Caleb is holding up for us very kindly. They walk you through a gospel. There's explanations of kind of what's going on, what different bits mean that are slightly difficult to understand, / questions to discuss, think about. I really recommend going through that either by yourself or with a Christian friend. If you'd like to go through it with someone and you don't know someone to go through it with, there's a sign-up sheet over there where you can sign up, and we'll pair you up with someone from CU who'd love to do that with you. Yeah. It's also on the link tree to the Warwick CU Instagram. So just thought I'd plug that really quick. And our next question is, what's the biggest cause of loneliness, in your opinion?
Gosh. So I've got a friend who is Scottish, and he, I don't think being Scottish has got anything to do with it, but he said for years he just felt this real biting loneliness. And I don't know whether he could tell you, but I think the biggest cause for loneliness generally in people is not whether there are people around you. It's whether people really see you. When I became a Christian, sort of maybe about 2 weeks before I went for that walk, before I was a Christian, I looked up into the darkness one night and I just got a sense of how empty the universe was. As an atheist, I thought, gosh, if I'm right, the universe is empty, meaningless. That means I am meaningless. But part of that fear, or that kind of awful feeling, was the sense that I've got people around me, but nobody can walk inside me and see me as I really am. And I think that a bit like my freezer, the more there is a distance between who I really am inside and what I present to people, the less people see who I really am. That, I think, is the cause of loneliness.
Thank you. And sort of as a counter to that question, what's the best way to tackle loneliness as a Christian?
Yeah, as a Christian. There's two things. One is that in the Christian life, we are called to be a family. And I think in this country, I think we've lost a lot of that sense of community. We ran a church in Oxford where we would eat dinner together every single week. And the kids would we had one long table and the kids would kind of come around with the ice creams, and it was great fun, and people had a sense of belonging there. And so I would connect yourself to a church that really knows how to do community, connect yourself in with the CU. Nevertheless, even then, if there is a sense of loneliness inside, I think that a lot of times there's a difference between what the Bible teaches and what our experience is. That's often a kind of degree of maturity, whether we have experienced enough of God. And when you really know Jesus and you're really walking with him, the kind of companionship and joy is the sort of thing which really heals things like that. And if you want to ask more about how to know Jesus as a Christian on a deeper level, do talk to me, because I've been through it relatively recently.
Thanks so much. I think we've got time for just one more question, if that's all right. This is a really interesting one. Do you think that Jesus ever felt lonely?
That is a very good question. And the answer is yes. I used to think people were making a big deal of this, but actually I've learned that they're not. So when Jesus was dying on the cross, he quoted some words from a song that was written about 1,000 years earlier. He said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. And this is God telling God, why have you forsaken me? It's hard to get your mind around, I know. But it was because on the cross, Jesus was accepting the dirty shoes, if you like, for every person potentially in the world who would ever follow him. He was taking the rubbish from the middle of our freezers. He was taking all the things that we've ever done on himself. And so the Father, God, had to turn his face away. And for the first time in eternity, Father and Son were separated. And it was shown by a supernatural darkness that came over the land. At that moment when Jesus had nails driven through his hands and his feet, that was not where the pain was. The pain was the immense weight of all our wrong and filth and selfishness and self-centeredness and being utterly cut off from the Father. And it happened then until he was raised from the dead.
Thank you so much, Peter. Those are really helpful answers. So that brings our time in this meeting, I don't know quite what it is, talk, situation, crafty thing, to a close. So thank you so much for coming, guys. We are going to be handing out some Chinese snacks on the way out. They have these allergens that I'll just get up. Wheat, soya, some of them have sesame. So if any of those apply to you, do check the back of the packets. And then there's going to be more snacks in the tent, so the big white tent on the other side of Junction. For those ones, the allergies will be listed on the containers that they've been bought in. So if that applies to you, hopefully you know what to do with that.
And I am seeing some lovely Chinese lanterns that have been made, especially that yellow one there. That's really nice. If you would like to display them, I think that string across the blackboard there, you can hang them up there to be seen forevermore. And we are here this whole week, as it's Events Week, Hope. There's lots of talks and activities and free food. You can check out the flyer that is being handed out constantly. I should have brought one, but it's like the green, over there, green thing with Hope on it and a schedule. So do check that out and come to whatever you feel like you would enjoy, or everything. That'd be great. And yeah. Well, I was going to say something else.
No, that's all right. Just to reiterate, feel like this point has already been driven home, but we really believe this. The gospel and the story of Jesus is not a fairy tale to us. It's not a self-help mechanism. It is something that's transformed my life, Ruben's life, Peter's life, the Christian who brought you along, their life. Oh, sorry. We really believe it, and we really believe it's good news for everyone. So if you'd like to know more about that, please speak to one of us, speak to the person you came with. Do go over and have a look at the bookstore afterwards. All of those books are free. They're a gift from us to you, and we would just love you guys to investigate this further.
I second that. So please do stick around and continue chatting with people around you, particularly about the idea of loneliness and the hope that Jesus can give you in that. And Peter and both of us are going to stick around, so if you want to talk to any of us, feel free.
Yep, and just a quick one to say we are back in this room this evening at 6:30 for a talk from Joe about where's the hope in doing good, which sounds pretty exciting. So yeah, if you'd like to come back for that, you'd be so welcome.
And tomorrow, we're thinking about whether science can explain everything, and the talk on that is at 6:30, the uniqueness of Jesus in a world of many religions.
Sounds pretty interesting. The next thing I've written down is books, but I've already talked about books, so I'm going to give the microphone right back.
Thanks. And that is it. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Can we give a round of applause to Peter? That was a